Well, as those of you who have been following this channel for a while should know, the U.S. has been engaged in negotiations with the Taliban for quite some time now to try and scale back and eventually end the war in Afghanistan. These negotiations have seemed quite promising, considering that the ultimate goal was set out from the beginning to be a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, meaning that the war would truly be over. And also, it was led by a staunch neoconservative, Zalmay Khalilzad, who, his appointment as chief negotiator in this situation sort of gave an impression to me that the establishment of the foreign policy intelligentsia in Washington was coming along to the side that it was time to end this war, and that it wasn't even in their best interests. The idea that a neoconservative who was very respectable amongst those circles would even consider taking this position as chief negotiator, and I believe his official title is U.S. Special Envoy, seemed quite promising to me. And of course, throughout all this, President Trump hasn't said too much about Afghanistan. He's really just been letting Khalilzad work, and Khalilzad has been working supposedly directly for the president, not under the State Department or the Defense Department. And he's had a clear mandate to end the war in Afghanistan. That is until, maybe yesterday or the day before, I don't know exactly when it was, that a headline came across the wire that seemed to show that President Trump was indicating to the media that, no, the war in Afghanistan really is going to go on forever, and we're not seriously considering pulling, all the troops out. That wouldn't happen. Trump gave an interview to Fox News Radio. I'm not exactly sure which host or whether it was an actual news reporter that he spoke to, but he gave the impression in the interview that there wasn't any serious talk of ending the war in Afghanistan, and that things are not going to go away, and that there's not going to be an end of combat or anything like that, and that the big line was, he said, well, we're still going to leave 8,600 troops. Which, of course, is a lot more than zero, which would be the number of troops that would be left if you ended the war in Afghanistan. 8,600 troops is not only a presence, but a substantial presence. A presence that Donald Trump said would go on in perpetuity. He said, and I quote, "We will always have a presence there." And so this was quite alarming to someone like me who's been following the Afghan negotiations so closely and has been so optimistic about how they've been going. It seemed like the president just went and threw a wrench in the whole thing and essentially said, nah, just kidding, guys. We're not really going to make peace with the Taliban. But I did a little extra digging, and it seems as though, based on what I'm hearing around, is that what the president said may have had a hawkish tone to it, but substantively, what he said did not really conflict with what's been going on with the peace negotiations. When President Trump said that, we'd still leave 8,600 troops, he sort of implied that would be forever, but he didn't really say that. And in fact, in the deal that they're working on, the current draft, I guess the idea is that initially the U.S. is going to draw down to 8,600 troops. And they're going to see if, the ceasefire with the Taliban holds out for a while. And if that does in fact happen, and that, the Taliban doesn't, ramp up the war as the U.S. starts pulling troops out, well, then the U.S. is going to keep pulling more troops out. And it's going to be a slow, managed process until eventually there are no U.S. troops left and the war is over. This is how the current peace plan is supposed to work. And so what President Trump said doesn't necessarily contradict that, although he kind of hid the fact that eventually there would be zero troops. And perhaps he's maybe just not that familiar with the plan. But it's a pretty major detail to leave out, that eventually the troop presence would be reduced to zero, unless Trump is really backtracking on that. Now, when you take into context, or when you take into consideration who he was speaking to, Trump was speaking to Fox News Radio, which is not the same as Fox News Channel, but perhaps President Trump was trying to tailor his message to the audience. And of course, the audience of any Fox property is going to be pretty let's say, hawkish on this sort of question, and they don't want to hear, at least if I'm Trump, I don't think that audience is going to want to hear, yeah, we're wussing out and we're running away because we couldn't win in Afghanistan. They want to hear something a little more belligerent. Something that sounds strong and in control, which of course the U.S. is neither of those things in Afghanistan. The U.S. is quite weak and been unable to assert control in Afghanistan in the last 18 years. So it's quite possible that what Trump said on Fox News Radio was just sort of his spin on the current peace plan. Perhaps he was trying to spin it to sound as something that's more hawkish than it actually is. Because while I'm not trying to play the whole it's a 3D chess game, sort of nonsense. I don't think that Trump is playing 3D chess. I think that he just sort of puts his own spin on everything to make things sound however he really wants them to for whatever audience. I think that Trump says a lot of things, and that normally what comes out of his mouth and is said, directly, oftentimes are things that he doesn't mean, and things that he goes back on quite quickly, or things that he later says he didn't mean in the way that everyone interpreted it. So while I'm not saying that what Trump said was positive for the prospects of peace in Afghanistan, it wasn't necessarily as negative as it would seem on the surface. It could just be simply that, Trump says stuff, which he does, and that this was just something that he said, not something that he really meant. To my knowledge, he's not called up Zalmay Khalilzad and ordered Khalilzad to break off peace negotiations with the Taliban, and he hasn't tried to sabotage the negotiations. Every negotiation meeting that they've had seems to have gone pretty well. So while I'm unhappy that the president said something so belligerent, I'm going to wait for more details and time to go by before I really make a determination that he's backtracking on the Afghan peace position. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. If you haven't already, I would appreciate it if you also subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.